Welcome to the WTR Healthcare Happenings podcast. I'm your host, Tim Gerdeman, Vice Chair and Co-founder and Chief Marketing Officer of Water Tower Research. Today's podcast episode, the second installment of our talk with Solvonis, I am joined by Professor David Nutt, Chief Scientific Officer at Solvonis Therapeutics, London Stock Exchange ticker SVNS. Professor Nutt is a prominent neuropsychopharmacologist. He is the Edmund J. Safra Professor of Neuropsychopharmacology and head of the Center for Psychedelic Research in the Division of Brain Sciences at Imperial College London. His work spans psychedelic research and addiction, and he has published more than 500 research papers, 36 books, and 8 government reports. Solvonis Therapeutics is a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company dedicated to developing novel medicines for high-burden central nervous system or CNS disorders with significant unmet needs. Solvonis is currently advancing a differentiated pipeline of repurposed and novel compounds across addiction, psychiatry, and neurology. David and Robert, welcome to today's podcast.
Good to be here.
Good to be here with you, Tim, again, and good morning, David.
David, to kick things off, can you tell us what you saw with Solvonis's business model and product pipeline that convinced you to step into the CSO role at the company to the point, in fact, of making it an exclusive collaboration, please?
Well, I saw two really important developments. The first was to take ketamine to what I think is its natural place as a leading alternative to current therapies for addiction. And secondly, to invest in new molecules we can use to replace what is currently the standard for therapy in innovative therapy in PTSD, MDMA. And we've had the opportunity to develop legal alternatives to MDMA, which we're now in the process of taking through safety testing with a view to bringing them into the clinic very shortly.
Great. Well, thank you for that. This is a most interesting and important topic in the medical world. So look forward to hearing the conversation. And over to you, Robert.
Yeah, thanks, Tim, and David. Good to have you on this podcast. Your well-known harm-ranking work helped reframe addiction as a neurobiological disease rather than a moral failing. Yet 30 years after naltrexone was approved, alcohol use disorder pharmacotherapy penetration in the US remains under 2%. So for investors, the question isn't whether AUD is undertreated, which it clearly is, but whether SVN001 actually breaks the pattern. And can you set out for us why adoption of drugs like naltrexone and acamprosate has stayed so low, and what's structurally different now that could let this category and SVN001 specifically break through?
Yes, so there are two aspects to this. The first is that it's still quite difficult to convince doctors that alcohol use disorder, alcohol dependence is a problem. There's this very famous joke. What's the definition of an alcoholic? That's someone who drinks more than their doctor, and doctors drink a lot. So they're kind of a bit resistant to diagnosing other people who might actually have lesser problems than they have. So that's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but the reality is there's been a huge resistance for the medical profession to engage in the treatment of alcoholism. And the second reason for that is that the treatments we have are not very good. You've mentioned naltrexone and acamprosate. They've both been around for over 20 years. They may be useful in 10 to 15% of people. They have to be taken every day. And the other problem with them is they don't actually target the reasons why people are drinking. They kind of offer some protection against craving and against binging if people start to drink, but they don't deal with the problem. And that's why our new SVN001 and hopefully will become 002 eventually, these treatments with ketamine are fundamentally different because they target the disorder and they target the brain mechanisms which perpetuate the disorder. And so they allow people after just a short course to essentially be free of the disorder. So it's not a chronic medication, it's an acute intervention which helps people have almost a reset to their brain so that they no longer desire alcohol, they no longer crave alcohol, and they can live a normal life without taking medication every day.
Yeah, I like your comment about the doctors. Um, Durability remains the unresolved question across virtually every AUD pharmacotherapy. And, existing therapies show benefit during active treatment, maybe, but effects often attenuate once treatment stops. So, can you address the durability effects of SVN001? And is the phase 3 program actually designed and powered to demonstrate durability prospectively, or is long-term persistence of effect likely to remain a post-approval question?
No, because the phase 3 study is going out to a year, which is about as much as you can reasonably expect for a disorder like addiction, way more than in previous trials have done. And the process is very much one of rectifying the disorder. Some people like to use the analogy of surgery. If you've got a chronic knee pain, you can treat it with analgesics for the rest of your life, or you can have a knee replacement, which is strong and relatively expensive at the time, but it does the business. And then from then on, you don't need other therapy. And that's the model we're using. It's a model of basically resetting the brain and giving people a new way of thinking about life, so they don't need to think about alcohol. They don't need to use alcohol, and therefore, and the effects are remarkably durable. We saw that in the phase 2b study, and the phase 3 study will take it to another level by going out for 1 year.
So the phase 2 study you mentioned, that was a sort of durability of over 6 months, was it?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. That's right.
So the AUD market has been described as being at an inflection point for much of the past decade, yet prescribing penetration has barely moved. So for Solvonis specifically, with SVN001 moving through the NHS and the MHRA pathways in the UK and SVN002 facing FDA and US payer dynamics, where do you generally see the regulatory and reimbursement environment becoming more favorable over the next 2 to 3 years, and where do the biggest structural obstacles still remain?
Well, alcohol use disorder is as costly as schizophrenia. So we know it's a huge problem, and it affects young people as well. There's an enormous desire to have improved therapies. The problem is the current therapies aren't that effective. We can't predict in who they're going to work, and because people have to keep taking them, because the nature of some of the personality issues we see with people with alcohol problems is such that they're not very reliable. So we're changing the mold. We're actually providing a different kind of therapy. And we know that the NHS is really looking forward to this. In fact, the remarkable thing about the SVN001 program is it's joint funded by the government through the National Institute of Health Research. We know that treating alcoholism has huge cost benefits, not just in terms of reducing health problems, but also getting people back to work. So there is little doubt that if the trial's positive, as I'm sure it will be, it'll be rapidly endorsed by the UK, by the NHS. They want it, they're looking for it, they're supporting it. The US situation is rather different. It may be that there's not much rollout of interventions, but there are vast numbers of clinics in the States which are providing interventions. They're usually providing it in the form of talking therapy, which is expensive and not so effective. So we believe that the US payers will be extremely encouraged by the results. If the results of the SVN002 are similar to what we've currently seen with 001, it would make perfect sense for the US insurers to invest in this, because it's going to save them money as well as give better patient outcomes.
Thank you for that. Let's look at the competitive landscape, or the prospective competitive landscape. So over the next 5 years, the addiction treatment landscape could include GLP-1 based therapies for AUD, as well as classical psychedelic-assisted approaches like psilocybin, if programs such as Compass succeed. In that environment, how do you define the ideal SVN001 patient, specifically for ketamine plus CBT, versus GLP-1s or serotonergic based psychedelic protocols? And is the patient population large enough to justify the clinic infrastructure and therapy-intensive delivery model?
Yes. So if we just deal with the second one first, there are plenty of clinics. It's just that what they're doing isn't desperately effective at present. But those clinics could easily adapt to both our ketamine program, the SVNO2 program, or to a psychedelic program, which would most likely be, as you pointed out, with psilocybin. So that, and both have ketamine and psilocybin have different advantages and different disadvantages. The great advantage of ketamine is it is available now. It may be quite a few years before psilocybin becomes available. No guarantee that it will become approved for alcoholism. So we're ahead of the game in that sense. But also, ketamine can be used in people who are on other medicines which block the effects of psilocybin. So there are quite a few people who are in treatment for alcoholism, sometimes over half, are on SSRIs. They're having those for anxiety, for depression. They don't really help the drinking, but they can interfere with the therapeutic benefit of psilocybin. And so most of the clinical trials of psilocybin, of which we've actually been one of the leading groups doing them, we've got people off the SSRIs, which is not a trivial thing to do. So with ketamine, you don't need to do that. You can just add, ketamine works pretty much irregardless of any other medication you're on. So it has a sort of broader spectrum of activity. It makes it easier to, more people are going to be amenable or available for its utility. So that's
Okay.
so the clinics are there. We can use it broadly. And in terms of the GLP-1s, well, it's fascinating, but currently the GLP-1 data is all secondary data. It's all people, yeah, if you're obese and you're drinking, well, your weight comes down and you drink less. But the studies, and I have examined several theses on this from Denmark, where they've invented these drugs, or at least co-invented them. The idea that GLP-1s are going to work in all forms of alcoholism is definitely not proven. Thin alcoholics might well actually find that they're problematic. They might not want to lose more weight. In fact, they might be dangerous for them to lose more weight. And also the other thing we really unsure about is that, yes, if you do control your drinking or reduce your drinking with a GLP-1, what happens if you stop? We know there's rebound obesity. Could there be rebound drinking? That could be quite problematic. So yes, I think they're clearly massively important new drugs, but whether they're going to be useful for what you might call primary alcoholism, I'm not so sure.
Right. As not to mention, also, we're using GLP-1s. You have a situation of lean mass loss. So, that's
Yes.
a
Well,
problem.
that's right. And I can tell you that most people that we treat who've got alcohol dependence, they may be overweight, but it's not muscle. And they definitely, they're definitely not healthy. So losing more muscle is not something that's likely to be good for them.
Absolutely. So every CNS company with more than two assets now describes itself as a platform company. So for Solvonis, the platform claim rests on the AI discovery engine, producing
Mhm.
a couple of new products, SVN 015 and SVN 114,
Mm.
and the broader proprietary library. What does the platform actually generate that a focused single asset developer couldn't? And what's the next asset coming out of that AI machine that would prove that the platform is real rather than a narrative wrapper around the lead programs?
Well, the platform was developed specifically, and it is the most extensive platform there's ever been to basically find a better MDMA. That's what it was set up to do. That was the ambition. Historically, we have a license to use MDMA. We have a license for the Imperial College data on MDMA that I generated for the utility of MDMA in the treatment of alcoholism. But as you and probably many of your listeners know, MDMA has proved slightly challenging. It's a drug that's quite popular. It's been widely used recreationally. It's got a lot of stigma, and fell foul of the FDA recently when it was a market authorization was approached for PTSD. It's also quite a difficult drug to use. It lasts quite a long time. The therapy sessions last 6 to 8 hours, and it's sometimes associated with increased anxiety and increased blood pressure. So it will be good to get an MDMA that was shorter acting and better tolerated and not abused and also legal. And that's what we set out to do. And that was a big program. That was several years. We've explored the neurochemistry, the neuropharmacology of MDMA and analogs to try to find agents which have similar profile, which is a serotonergic dominant profile, but with some effects on noradrenaline, but with minimal effects on some effects on dopamine, but minimal effects on noradrenaline to reduce the risk of blood pressure and anxiety. And also to control the half-life so you didn't have the long duration of effect of MDMA. And we've succeeded, and we've developed 6 molecules which fit those requirements in the test tube, and we've now taken 4 of them and put them into animal models and shown that at least 3 of them do have the requisite profile compared with the MDMA that we've obviously been studying in animals alongside it. So we're now in a position where we can go to lead optimization and get into phase 1 with what I think will be an interesting alternative and currently unregulated, uncontrolled, non-legal alternative to MDMA. But a spin-off of that was the fact that we obviously made a lot of molecules, tested a lot of molecules, and we found a molecule which was very different from MDMA. It's not a releasing agent like our analogs of MDMA are, but it's actually an uptake blocker, but has a unique combination. As you probably know, uptake blockers have been very powerful, very effective treatments for depression. Think of Prozac, which is a serotonin uptake blocker. And there are uptake blockers also like atomoxetine for ADHD. And there are mixed uptake blockers like venlafaxine, which is both serotonin and noradrenaline. But we found one which is a fascinating mixture of serotonin and dopamine. And those molecules don't exist, but this one does. And what's particularly interesting in this molecule is that balance, predominantly serotonin, but with sufficient dopamine reuptake blockade, that we've discussed with the National Institute of Drug Abuse in the States. This could be a really interesting potential therapy for stimulant use disorder, cocaine or methamphetamine, because both cocaine and methamphetamine work through being taken into dopamine neurons and releasing dopamine. And our belief is that the dopamine reuptake effect of SVN015 will be sufficient to reduce the effects of cocaine and methamphetamine, and also potentially treat the lack of energy that you see, the lack of hedonia you see during withdrawal from those stimulants. And I'm pleased to say that NIDA was sufficiently convinced by our preclinical data to take it through their broader state of testing. They've tested it now on cardiac channels where it's proved to be safe, and also through a range of other target molecules which they deem to be necessary as screening for before they'll take it to the next stage, which is functional testing, and it's passed those tests too. So we're in negotiations now with NIDA to see if we can put it into one of their animal models to see if it will reduce the use of stimulants like cocaine and methamphetamine and not add any potential toxic interactions with those 2 particular problematic stimulants. So those discussions are ongoing, and we will be writing a grant, which I hope they will approve in the near future.
Right. Okay, that was a question I was going to ask about SVN015, but you answered it very well there. So, David, to close, you recently spoke at the NIH CRAN Joint Council as the sole external speaker on psychedelic therapy for addictions. From inside that room with Volko and Kube on the panel, where do you think the US federal addiction research community actually is on psychedelic-assisted treatment for AUD and stimulant use disorder? And how does that shape your conviction in the Solvonis pipeline?
Well, they weren't critical, let's put it that way. I think they were actually very interested. The questions were mechanistic questions, which suggests that they want to understand how they work. I suspect they believe they do work. And I think, the winds look favorable for us to go to both NIAAA and to NIDA to get grant support to take these our lead molecules forward into the next level of testing. So I was obviously, honored to be able to speak to them and delighted that they didn't tear me apart. So I think, it was as good a result as we could have hoped for, frankly.
Thank you. That's fascinating. And, wish you every success and, advancing those compounds, to the good of of society. So, thank you for sharing your deep expertise across addiction and psychedelics landscape and for helping clarify where Solvonis sits within the evolving ecosystem. So, back to you, Tim.
Thanks, Robert, for those thought-provoking questions. And David, thank you so much for the very, very interesting answers to those questions. Actually, your work is really, really important. We know there's a lot of heartbreaking stories tied to addiction around the world. As we spoke with Anthony last week on the first this series on the podcast, it's a massive global total addressable market. So very, very important work you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe, as well as visiting www.watertowerresearch.com to stay up to speed on the company's small cap written research reports, podcasts, fireside chats, industry-specific symposiums, and conference schedules. We will see you next time for another edition of the WTR Healthcare Happenings podcast. Finally, a special thanks to the producer and editor of the podcast, Krista Fitzpatrick.